Acelerador. Ok. Estamos de acuerdo con grabar la entrevista, ¿cierto?
Por supuesto, claro que sí, and agree.
Super. So, the first question. In your experience as an educator, researcher, how do cultural and historical perspectives shape the way Spanish is understood and taught?
It's a very good question, and in my case, I'm from Spain. I could notice that there is, in some point, an Eurocentric way of understanding the language of Spanish, because Spanish is not only from Spain, but mainly, and Spanish is now one of the most important languages in the world, not because the number of people talking Spanish in Spain, but mainly because the people talking Spanish all over the world, and mainly in Latin America and the Caribbean, right? Then that's something that I notice that sometimes it's a misunderstanding when we have an approach to Spanish. And I noticed that especially, for example, when I was living in China, I realized that, for example, all the universities in China, when they were hiring professors to teach Spanish, they were only hiring people from Spain. And after my experience being an international student in Miami at Florida International University, I realized that the place where you can learn more Spanish in terms of the varieties and the richness of this language is precisely here. Then I'm making this comment because I think that it's important to think when you're a teacher of Spanish that you're teaching a language that is so rich, has so many varieties, that you cannot be only focusing in one country as a Spanish speaker country, because you have many of them.
So many.
Many of them. And that's something that shaped the way that I teach Spanish, and especially when I approach to how to make students manage better the different varieties of Spanish. Because, for example, in China, Spanish is needed mainly because the relation that this country has now with Latin America. And the students were going to be exposed mainly to varieties of Spanish from Latin America and not that much from Europe or from Spain in this case, right? Then that's part of my approach when I teach Spanish.
Talking about like different regions, like we just mentioned, we know that Spain has many dialects, many regions. How do geographical and linguistic diversity influence the attitude towards what is considered like the correct Spanish or like the standard
Exactly.
Spanish?
I usually get rid of that idea of having a Spanish that is good or a Spanish that is bad. And that's part of my personal experience as well, because I'm from Spain, but I'm from the south of Spain. Then the dialect that we have there is Andalusian. It's not Castilian Spanish. Then that's make a difference, because many people in Spain, they think that people from Andalusia, we don't speak buen español or good Spanish. Then that's perhaps why I'm more close to that idea of not having a standard Spanish. Standard Spanish is a Spanish that is including different ways of Spanish at the same time. Then probably my Spanish is getting more standard when I'm getting in contact with another varieties of Spanish, right? And yeah, Spain is a country with a very diverse number of languages, we already have 4 co-official languages. Is the Catalan, the Basque, Galician, and Valencian. In Valencia region, they have, there is kind of a academic discussion about if that's Catalan or is Valencian. But, that's something that we have in my country. But from my experience, talking a different dialect from the Castilian Spanish, that usually is the one considered the best Spanish, and I quote that I really think that we don't need to be under that idea. Why? Because, for example, if I don't manage the way of speaking Spanish in a Spanish native country where I'm gonna do my business or where I'm gonna have my students, probably I'm gonna be having a lack of communication. Then I think we need to be open to get rid of that idea of a proper Spanish. The proper Spanish is the one that is letting me communicate effectively with the audience that I have in front of me. Then sometimes I need to think which country I'm talking in or which type of audience I have. Then I will be trying just to avoid some part of my Spanish that even can be offensive for that people in that country that they speak Spanish, but they don't have the same variety. Then I think that the good Spanish would be the one that is able to be adapted to the people that you're going to be communicating with.
So from your perspective, how might these local ideologies or belief about the Spanish language are different from like the Latin America Spanish?
There are many differences, there are even semantic difference, there are phonetic difference, there are the influence of the English in the Spanish here in the Americas is huge. And it makes sense because, even when in Spain we have some words coming from the English, still here I noticed that is, still here I noticed that we have even more. Why? Because they're the neighbors. And the territory is in some point telling us a lot of things about how a language evolution is. Then saying that, absolutely, the local influence of the culture, the history, the territory is already part of a language. Then pretend to isolate a language from all those factors, I think is a wrong way to become a teacher of a language. It's like, for example, my English was mainly taught by people from England. All my teachers were studying in Oxford. The lectures were coming from professors from England, from the Great Britain. Then I was more exposed to the English from those countries. And I remember, I don't forget that one year I had a teacher of English that his accent was from the US. And I noticed the difference. I said, oh, this English is not good? Why is not good? Then I learned, because that opportunity, that people can have different varieties of the same language. And it doesn't mean that they don't speak properly. I think that's a very colonial way of thinking. And European, we are very colonial people in our mindset. Then we usually think that our way of speaking is the best. And it makes sense because I always say that the Castilian kingdom was the one arriving to the Americas. And they were the one with the power, and they were the one with the economic power at the same time. But most of the people in those ships coming to the Americas were from the south of Spain, from the Canary Island. Then finally, there is a connection between my dialect and the Spanish that we have in Latin America. And perhaps that's why I feel closer to that perception of the language than the Castilian standard good Spanish.
So, when conducting research related to language or education in Spanish, what would your advice be to the person doing the research? Like, what would your advice be to me if I were to do research in how Spanish, like, is as a language or is taught?
I think it's important that you take these different factors when you are developing any research. First, you need to get rid of the idea that people are talking a good or bad Spanish, depending on where they are from. But mainly, I think the best approach is that you are trying to do research, understanding the cultural elements surrounding the language, history, social class, country. There are many different elements that in some point I think are making an impact in the code or the way that you have to talk or to do a research on Spanish. And that's the main advice. If I can give advice, I don't like to give any advice, but mainly just to have a more open approach and not making any assessment with this stereotype of people having a good or a bad Spanish. Is why these people are talking that type of variety of Spanish and how you can take that on your research. For example, if you are doing research for future professors or teachers, including that variety of Spanish is a very important thing because it depends on the needs of your students that you need to adapt not only the content but even the way that you are offering examples or you are talking about cultural elements. That's gonna make, I think, your research more feasible and accurate to the real context. Languages are not isolated. Languages are always part of a sociolinguistic perspective. Then it's not only about phonetic, it's not only about semantic, it's about history, it's about how the different communities are using that language. Then I think that would be a better approach for having a good research about languages.
Do you think there are cultural or institutional factors that affect how research on a language is published or valued?
Absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely, it depends of the journal, it depends of the publisher, it depends of the institution that is funding the research. For sure, you need just to meet the expectations from that part. And sometimes we know that our research is in some point influenced by the different administrations who are already funding that research. And sometimes we can figure out how to adapt our hypotheses or our research depending on the institution that we are going to get the funding from. Then it's different when you are making a proposal for a private foundation or for an administration in the different levels. Can be in mind that you want to get funding from European institutions, then probably you need to focus more in that Spanish varieties that are coming from Spain. But if you're suddenly talking about a federal institution in the US, it's better just to have an approach more from the Latin American varieties, then that's something that you need to work on when you're doing proposals as well. And the cultural element, not the cultural element, but mainly the nature of the people who are, or the administration or foundations or institutions who are funding your research. In some point, you need just to meet their expectations. And you want them to listen to you in the way that they want to listen the people making proposal for that.
And last question, what would your advice be to someone who wants to learn Spanish and they're scared of like speaking out because they're not from Spain or maybe from Spain or the way they use slang? Like, what would your advice be to them?
Well, I always use, there is a definition that I always like is to make the classroom a safe space for everyone. And in this point, something that I say always in the first time that I'm teaching a new group is that they don't need to be afraid of having errors when they are speaking in Spanish. And I always say something, and I think it's true, if they don't have errors, I don't have work. Because I'm teaching a language that supposedly they don't manage properly. Then if they are very good at Spanish, then I don't have nothing to do with them. Then I don't have any work to do. Then I'm a professor, and my mission mainly is to guide my students and to let them grow in the manage of the language. Then mainly what I need to do is to make them know that their errors are my work. Then, and it's good because the methodology that I have usually is based on making, it's a TBLT, task-based language teaching. One of the hypotheses is that the students need to notice their lack in the management of a language. And that's a way that they're going to be realizing about what they need to learn. And that's something that helped me to guide them and to facilitate the process of teaching for them. Then mainly, the only way that you have to learn a language is just to using that target language. The way that I was learning Chinese was getting exposed to different situations in the real world where I had the chance to practice my Chinese. And for sure, many times I was failing, but many times, because that failing, I was learning how to do it better. But if I don't expose myself to that, I'm not going to get that opportunity. Then that's the way that I think we need just to think in terms of learning languages. Especially when we get feedback as a teacher, we need to be very careful. And we need to explain to students what's going on when they are learning. Because sometimes, when we read many literature that we have about the process of learning a second language, students they're gonna understand better what's going on in their brains, and they're gonna understand that what is happening to them is something that is happening to everyone learning a language. Then, when I'm now speaking in English, probably my meta language, that is Spanish, is making a big influence on my way of talking in English as well. Then that's something that is happening, but I hope that even having that issue, still you can understand my English, and we can do this interview in a language that is not my native language.
So any final comments or something that I didn't ask that you would like to add? Anything else?
Well, I really encourage anyone. I do appreciate that you are doing this because you are already a graduate student in our master degree. And I think it's very important for all of you focusing on getting all the best instruments that you can use in your teaching process and for your research. And I think teachers are always learning. Then, to become a teacher, it doesn't mean that you are the one managing 100% everything that you are teaching to your students. You have your doubts, and sometimes you have your own dialect, and you need to make that not an issue, but something that is making students understand better the variety of a language. Then it's not a lack, it's something that is enriching the experience of them for their learning process.
Awesome. Thank you so much for meeting with me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Natalie.